The bridge through the years. The girl by the bridge. The sun was setting behind the rugged mountains of Tokushima, bathing the lush landscape in hues of amber and gold. The Kazura-bashi bridge, a masterpiece of ancient engineering, swayed gently in the evening breeze, its vines creaking softly. This bridge had stood for centuries, its tangled web of greenery enduring storms, floods, and the footsteps of countless travelers. For Naoko, however, it was more than just a crossing. It was a place of memories and quiet yearning. Naoko had been coming here every evening for as long as she could remember. She was a small woman, her frame delicate, but her presence unyielding, like a flower that thrived in adversity. Her long, dark hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, framing a face that bore the quiet resilience of someone who had endured much but spoke of it little. To the villagers, she was simply the girl by the bridge, a figure so consistent in her routine that she had become part of the landscape. The story of why she stood there, evening after evening, began during the last brutal years of the war. Naoko was just a teenager then, living in a small house at the edge of the village with her aging parents. Life was hard, food was scarce, and the fear of air raids or military patrols was constant. One afternoon, as she worked in the rice fields, her attention was drawn to a rustling in the tall stalks. Crouched low, she discovered a young soldier, his uniform torn and caked with mud, his face pale from exhaustion. "Please," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I mean no harm." Though frightened, Naoko saw the desperation in his eyes. She offered him water from her flask and asked his name. "Kenji Masuda," he said, struggling to sit upright. He explained that he was a deserter, fleeing the horrors of the battlefield. The army had taken everything from him, his family, his friends, even his will to fight. Now all he wanted was to survive. Naoko knew the risks of harboring a deserter. If discovered, her family would face severe punishment, perhaps even death. But she couldn't bring herself to turn him away. Her father, a man of quiet wisdom, had always told her that kindness was the most courageous act one could offer in a world filled with cruelty. She led Kenji to the old barn at the edge of their property, where he could hide among the hay bales. Over the following weeks, she brought him food, water, and medicine, doing her best to care for his wounds. They spoke in hushed tones, sharing fragments of their lives. Kenji, it turned out, was not much older than Naoko. He had dreams of becoming a teacher and spoke wistfully of a Japan free from the shadow of war. As the days turned into weeks, their bond deepened. Naoko found herself looking forward to their quiet conversations, where Kenji's gentle demeanor contrasted sharply with the harshness of their reality, yet the danger was ever present. The military police were intensifying their searches, and rumors of deserters in the area spread fear among the villagers. One evening, under a sky filled with stars, Kenji told Naoko he had to leave. "Your kindness has given me strength," he said, his voice trembling, "but I can't put you and your family at risk any longer." Naoko's heart ached at the thought of his departure, but she knew he was right. As tears streamed down her cheeks, Kenji reached for her hand. "If I survive," he said, "I will return to this bridge. Wait for me, Naoko, no matter how long it takes." She promised, her voice barely audible. They embraced for the first and last time before Kenji disappeared into the shadowy mountains, leaving Naoko to cling to the fragile hope of his return. That night, as the stars glittered above, the Kazura-bashi bridge became a symbol of their unspoken love and an unbreakable promise. The waiting years. After Kenji left, life in the village returned to its quiet monotony. But for Naoko, the days felt heavier, each one stretching endlessly. She kept busy helping her parents in the fields, fetching water from the nearby river, and preparing meals from the meager supplies they could scrape together. Yet every evening as the sun dipped behind the mountains, she found herself drawn to the Kazura-bashi bridge. At first, she told herself she was simply honoring her promise to Kenji. But as weeks turned to months and seasons changed, it became more than that. The bridge had become a place where she could be alone with her thoughts, a sanctuary where the memories of Kenji felt alive. She replayed their conversations in her mind, the way he spoke of his dreams, the softness in his voice, the way his eyes lit up when he described the cherry blossoms in spring. The villagers noticed her routine. At first, They whispered among themselves, curious about why she spent so much time by the bridge. But as the years passed, they grew accustomed to her presence. Some even began to create stories about her. "She's waiting for her true love," an elderly woman would say, shaking her head with a mix of pity and admiration. Such devotion is rare these days. Naoko never acknowledged the rumors. She simply smiled politely and carried on with her life. Inside, however, she clung to a stubborn hope. Despite the years, despite the fact that she had no way of knowing if Kenji was alive or dead, she believed in his promise. Her parents passed away during a particularly harsh winter. The village elders suggested she marry and start a family, but Naoko politely declined each proposal. "I have my own path to follow," she would say, her voice calm but resolute. She used her inheritance to maintain the family home and lived a simple life, just earning a modest income by weaving baskets and selling them at the market. Every year, on the anniversary of Kenji's departure, she made a small offering at the base of the bridge, a handful of rice, a cup of sake, and a single wildflower. It was her way of keeping his memory alive, a quiet ritual that connected her to the past. The years turned into decades. The world around her changed. New technologies arrived in the village, and younger generations brought with them a sense of modernity that felt foreign to Naoko. Yet, the Kazura-bashi bridge remained untouched, its ancient vines as steadfast as her hope. One spring evening, as the cherry blossoms painted the landscape in shades of pink and white, a group of tourists arrived at the village. They had come to see the famous bridge, and their presence brought an unusual energy to the usually tranquil area. Among them was a young journalist named Emi, who had heard the story of the girl by the bridge and was eager to learn more. Emi approached Naoko, her notebook and camera in hand. "Is it true that you've been coming here every day for decades?" she asked, her tone a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Naoko smiled gently. "Not every day," she replied, her voice soft. "But often enough. This bridge holds a special place in my heart." "Do you mind if I ask why?" Emi pressed, sensing a deeper story. Naoko hesitated. It had been years since she had spoken of Kenji to anyone, but something about Emi's earnestness made her open up. She recounted the tale, her words painting a vivid picture of that fateful encounter, the risks they took, and the promise that bound them. By the time Naoko finished, Emi's eyes were glistening with tears. "That's incredible," she said. "Do you think he's still out there?" Naoko looked out at the bridge, her gaze distant but unwavering. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I made a promise. And promises are meant to be kept." As the sun set behind the mountains, Emi took a photograph of Naoko standing by the bridge, her silhouette framed by the golden light. She didn't realize at the time how much that image would resonate with people around the world. Path the Stranger. A week after Emi's visit, the photo of Naoko by the Kazura-bashi bridge went viral. The young journalist had written a heartfelt article about the woman who waited, sharing Naoko's story of unyielding hope and devotion. It captivated readers across Japan and beyond. Letters poured into the village, some addressed to Naoko herself. Strangers wrote to express their admiration, to offer prayers, and in some cases to tell their own stories of waiting and loss. At first, Naoko was overwhelmed by the attention. She had lived her life in quiet obscurity, and the sudden spotlight felt almost intrusive. But as she read through the letters, she began to see the beauty in the connections her story had forged. People she had never met were inspired by her patience and loyalty. It gave her a sense of purpose, as though her years of waiting had meaning beyond her own life. One rainy afternoon, as Naoko sat by her window, sorting through yet another stack of letters, she noticed an envelope that stood out. It was old and weathered, its edges frayed as though it had traveled a great distance. The handwriting on the front was unfamiliar, but something about it stirred a memory deep within her. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, its words written in a careful, deliberate hand. "Naoko, if this reaches you, it means I am alive. I have thought of you every day since I left. The war took me far from home, and circumstances kept me from returning. But I never forgot you. If you are still there, waiting by the bridge, I will come to you. Kenji." The room seemed to spin around her as she read the letter again and again. Could it really be him? After all these years? The postmark was faded, making it impossible to tell when or where the letter had been sent. But the words were unmistakably his. The following days were a blur. Naoko began visiting the bridge more frequently, sometimes sitting there for hours, scanning the horizon for any sign of him. The villagers, now familiar with her story, watched with bated breath, their curiosity mingled with hope. And then, one crisp autumn morning, as the mist lifted from the mountains, a figure appeared in the distance. He was older, his posture slightly stooped, but his gait was steady, purposeful. Naoko's heart raced as she stood at the edge of the bridge, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. When the man reached her, he stopped, his eyes searching hers with a mix of disbelief and joy. "Naoko," he said, his voice breaking. "Kenji," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. They stood there for what felt like an eternity, the years of separation dissolving in the quiet power of that moment. Around them, the villagers began to gather, their cheers and applause echoing through the valley. Kenji explained how he had been taken prisoner during the war, forced to labor in a foreign land for years before finally being released. The letter he had sent was written long ago, but had somehow been delayed in its journey. He had almost given up hope of finding her, but the article by Emmy had reached him, guiding him back to the place where their story had begun. As the sun set over the Kazura-bashi bridge, casting its golden light on the reunited lovers, Naoko felt the weight of the years lift from her shoulders. She had waited, not knowing if her hope was in vain, but now, standing beside Kenji, she knew it had all been worth it. Their story became a legend, a testament to the enduring power of love and the promises that bind us, no matter the distance or the years.